Hello, folks. My name is Michael Cockrell. I'm head of Adult Services here at the library, and I just want to welcome you tonight. We have 4 amazing local talented authors here to read for us. Wanted to first say I'm happy to see no coats hanging off the back of these chairs. Once it seems like it would never happen, but I even see shorts in the crowd, so that's fantastic too. Dean from Michigan News is in the back selling books that you can have autographed after the meeting. Support Michigan News Agency and buy some books. 4 talented authors tonight. They're going to read in one at a time, and then at the end, they're all going to read at once. They're going to have a Q&A after, so save your questions for each one till the end. They'll all come up and answer those as they see fit. Our first reader, originally from Washington, D.C., Deborah King moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan to attend grad school and remained there, both for her work as a psychotherapist and for the huge freshwater ocean to our west. Her research is published in Education and Treatment of Children, and her poems and short stories are seen in various obscure literary journals. The Half-Life of Everything is her first novel.
I wish I had written this next line, but it was Jorge Luis Borges who said, "I have always imagined paradise as a kind of library." Thank you, Michael and Kalamazoo Public Library, for hosting us, for welcoming my book. Thank all of you for joining us in this exploration of good people, bad luck, otherwise known as the winter of 2019. We did not deserve that weather. Michael, tell me if the mic is not right at some point. Does it? Good, okay. In Catcher in the Rye, Salinger has a character comment on why we read. And it so fits these terrible times that I'll read that section to you. You'll find that you're not the first person who was ever confused and frightened and even sickened by human behavior. Many, many people have been just as troubled as you are right now. Happily, some of them kept records of their troubles. You'll learn from these if you want to. Just as someday, if you have something to offer, someone will learn something from you. It's a beautiful reciprocal arrangement. And it isn't education, it's history, it's poetry. In my novel, The Half-Life of Everything, we have 3 main characters. Kate and David are very happily married 50-somethings with 2 sons, when at the start of the book, Kate becomes ill with Alzheimer's. We jump right away to the point where she has been sick for about 5 years, and David wonders, what is a married widower supposed to do with the rest of his life? He is resolutely faithful until he meets our third character, Jane, and they fall seriously in love. When an experimental treatment restores Kate to health, David is shocked to find himself in love with 2 people, something he never thought possible. Has he now become a bad person who's making bad things happen rather than a victim of bad luck? Some readers think so and have no sympathy for him or Jane. Some readers don't even like Kate, which I don't get, but to each their own. But many readers do not condemn him and continue to see him as a good person, though I think he veers towards dangerous territory when he is less than honest with Kate and he at least contemplates a secret relationship with Jane. Of course, he can contemplate the possibility because he knows Jane would never allow it. I'll read a brief section. David loved the goodness in Jane, and now he couldn't have her precisely because she was good. Was he still good? He had been good at being untested. He had rigorously avoided temptation. that most slippery of slopes. And there was goodness in that. Even now, he knew he pushed her to see him because it was safe. He could count on her to turn him down. It wasn't entirely fair to ask her, but he couldn't think of any other way to talk about how much he loved her. He had reverted to a primitive gender role in which he pursued and she maintained virtue. Some years ago, I heard one of those quick top-of-the-news hour stories on, where else, NPR, about a new treatment for Alzheimer's, and it sounded especially convincing. Great results, exciting news, and I thought, well, what if? What if someone could come back from a hopeless brain disorder? Like those wonderful old movies in which someone long thought lost in a shipwreck returns just after their spouse has married someone else. When I began to write this story, I knew the setup, but I certainly didn't know how the characters would solve their various problems. Terry Pratchett says, and I found this quite reassuring, the first draft is just you telling yourself a story. I think some writers know the story and just need to get it written. Others write to find out more. My story is not Gone Girl with dueling psychopaths. In writing about ordinary people, the challenge is to make them interesting despite the lack of murderers or predators. Not that there's anything wrong with murderers, Bonnie, I get that. It's comforting to know that John Updike said one purpose of writing can be to give the mundane its beautiful due. In her short story collection, Florida, Lauren Groff has a character say to her husband, "Tell me, you think there are still good people in the world?" "Oh, yes," he said, "billions. It's just that the bad ones make so much noise." I would add that most people's lives are without villains. Our villains are luck, illness, circumstance, differentness, loss, poverty. Can you tell a story without villains? How do good people handle terrible luck? Though I also like Oliver's variation when he did his interview for WMUK. He said he'd switched it also to bad people, good luck. And maybe we can talk more about that later. That's very provocative. Character-driven fiction, which is often how we define literary fiction, needs plot along with the characters that we care about. Maybe not a cliffhanger at every chapter end, but it also needs ideas. And the themes revealed themselves to me along with the plot. Marriage and the balance of power. Even in happy marriages, does one person love slightly more? Does David move from being the one who loves more to now subtly having the upper hand? All novels featuring a marriage have to have a dishwasher loading scene. So I will read you mine. And people sometimes point out, they'll say, I just came across the dishwasher loading scene in the book I'm reading. So David's gratitude didn't stop him from one evening telling Kate, I continue to really dislike how you load the dishwasher. I can't believe you care about something that's small. You have dish loading OCD. If you don't care about it, then why don't you do it the way I like? He had never made this point before. He had always backed down, always let it stand that he was the petty one. Well, because I'd have to think about, she stopped for a second and started again. Because the issue betrays the fact that you don't think I'm perfect, and we were always based on the idea that you thought I was perfect. Her smile was sheepish. Perfect for me, Katie, not incapable of annoying. He watched her move the dirty bowls to where they should be. Crushes and attractions. I wanted to weave throughout the story the normalcy of these events. Jane's gay friend has a crush on David, which David probably doesn't notice and which nobody fusses about. The older son, Dylan, develops a bit of a crush on Jane, despite being madly in love with his age-appropriate girlfriend. Resisting attractions and being a good and faithful husband and a good person are both natural parts of David's character, but also something he works on. Feeling yourself seriously attracted to someone when you or they are not available can certainly be bad luck. How do good people handle it? To say that he appreciated without wanting wasn't a complete answer. It's what you tell your wife, but it's not the whole story. He had always been interested in the lifespan of crushes. His own, of course, were the only ones that he could follow confidently. There had been 3 since he and Kate got married, an interest in a colleague, then a neighbor, and the last, a friend's wife, all punctuating the first 20 or so years of their marriage. The first time he was a novice, and as the attraction grew, he thought he'd have to do something about the desire. He thought the feelings had some authority and that eventually he'd be under their command. But he didn't do anything, even though he was almost certain his interest was reciprocated. And he didn't do anything about the next 2 either. Sometimes he thought of each woman in turn when he was having sex with Kate, and he never felt guilty. That's what wives were for, he knew, to be the person you were with, thinking whatever thoughts you wanted while you weren't out wrecking lives. He learned that he didn't have to obey these odd obsessive attachments. He just needed to be careful not to betray anything, not to pay too little or too much attention, not to make anyone else feel excluded from the light of the attraction, and eventually it dimmed, or she moved away. The dimming was a better solution because you saw how unnecessary it proved to be to act. The heat died down, and your wife was your life again, and you hadn't ruined anything. If you're writing a love story, you need to make decisions about sex. You can avoid it, as I did in the earliest version, where I just did a ladylike fade out for the ending of David and Jane's first date, which caused the workshop instructor to say, oh no, you don't get to do that. You have to write something. You don't have to go all genitalia, but you have to write something. She had no memory of saying that, but I reminded her recently. Luckily, it was only this year that I read Ann Tyler's 2012 interview in which she said, I would never be in bed with my characters. I try to show them some respect. Much though I admire Tyler, for me, Philip Roth may have the better advice when he said, shame isn't for writers. You have to be shameless. You can't worry about being decorous. So in writing this story, I progressed from skipping sex entirely to earning a very nutty 1-star review on Amazon complaining the book was nothing but sex. He or she said the only good thing about this book is the title. Loss and grief. If you're lucky enough to have love, then you're going to experience grief. By having Kate leave the scene so quickly, I didn't need to catalog her descent into the illness, and others have done that so beautifully, particularly the book Still Alice. For me, it was more interesting to convey David's chronic state of emptiness and sadness. I think the writer Dan Shawn captured that kind of grief when he recently wrote for the Times travel section about losing his wife, and with that loss, losing her side of their mutual memories, especially their travels. Here is the terrible beauty of being in love, that you will know things together that no one else will know, that there are events that exist only in the commingling and exchange of memories. Is there a word for that kind of symbiosis? There must be one in French. I would say yes, Dan, and it's folie à deux, madness for two, because it is a kind of madness to let your happiness depend so much on another frail mortal. A memoir can be strictly an account of grief, and there are many beautiful memoirs. Wave is my favorite. I won't describe it because it'll sound terrible and you won't read it, so I'll just say read the memoir, Wave. But a novel needs a broader canvas, and for me that included the theme of friendship. The strength and power of friendship wasn't anything I set out to write about, but something I realized I had done after the fact. It seems to me that friendship is somewhat neglected in fiction, or it's featured largely in the most unhealthy and destructive ways. The British writer Penelope Lively writes, friendship is the love that is ignored. People don't theorize about friendship, write poetry about it. It just goes quietly along, sustaining. Passion spends itself. Oh my goodness, does passion spend itself? But friendship is always there. Like a good marriage, it survives attack. There is friendship between the husband and wife, Kate and David, between Kate and her neighbor, Martha, between the two sons. The sons even forged an unlikely friendship with Jane, their father's lover. In David's case, after Kate has been ill for some time, he finds himself down to one friend, Ian, who doesn't mind morose. It's not catching what you have, Ian says, when David comments on Ian's imperviousness to his moods. And it must be exhausting for you, all those hours on the job making sure no one pities you. Well, I pity you plenty, so don't bother being fake with me. Because you're still funny. You're a dark, pathetic, funny bastard, and my brothers are 4,000 miles away, so you'll have to do. Now Ian was the only one David confided in. Others changed the subject with practice speed, but with Ian he could give his brief but terrible update, and Ian would listen and say, that is so fucked. And no matter how long before they next met, he would remember everything that David had said. Last theme, aging and death. You knew that was coming. To me, at its core, all fiction is about aging, no matter which generation features in the plot. And to state the obvious, death is the ultimate piece of bad luck that we all face, no matter how good we are. We are each somewhere along the half-life of our allotted span. We just never know for sure what portion is being divided and then divided again. In addition to the scientific definition of half-life, there's an informal one, a brief period during which something flourishes before dying out. Could anyone describe life in fewer or more beautiful words? I do not allow the 20-something characters to be immune from anxiety. When Lily, the older son's girlfriend, realizes that she's pregnant, unplanned, not on the schedule of two seriously well-organized PhD students, she catalogs her fears. Lily was afraid, not so much of the lottery of a healthy baby, and not so much of the juggling or finding the right daycare, or even of the nights to come worrying about a teenager driving stupidly, or drugs or binge drinking, things even she and Dylan, comparatively sensible as teenagers go, still had done too much of. She was afraid of her child having a middle-age illness in middle age, or like Kate, an old-age illness in middle age, or that by then everyone would have some kind of cancer, having poisoned themselves and the planet with exhaust and plastic bits like in a Margaret Atwood novel. She was afraid of an apocalypse and that order would break down and their child would never know safety. And if not their child, she was afraid for their grandchildren who will live in a foreign and unimproved version of an already brutal world. She was afraid of things she couldn't imagine along with everything she could. And yet, she was extravagantly happy, as if she had waited her entire life for this child, even though she'd scarcely given children a conscious thought, and when she did, it was always not yet, not convenient. She needed these last hours before she told Dylan, because she knew he would be afraid too, and she wanted him to name his fears, and she would be calm and agree with him that everything he feared was possible. Her neutral acceptance of his disaster list would perversely disarm him, as agreement does, and they would set catastrophe aside. Then she could give in to the abundance of her delight, as if they had done something remarkable, as if they had invented something. At the end of the story, the young adults are growing up. We hear from Lily one last time. She had the thought, and it was a new one, that time goes by just slowly enough to trick you into thinking life is long. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. In my household, dishwasher loading, I'm the one that's doing it wrong, so that passage has me thinking, or rethinking. Our next author, Andy Mozina, is the author of two story collections, Quality Snacks, and The Women Were Leaving the Men, both from Wayne State Youth Press, and the novel Contrary Motion, published by Spiegel and Grau. His fiction has appeared in Tin House, Southern Review, the Missouri Review, and elsewhere, and has received special citation in Best American Short Stories, Pushcart Prize, and the New Stories from the Midwest. Andy Mozina.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. I'm just going to read from the opening pages of a new novel that I'm working on, and it's called Tandem. The sun was setting when Mike Kovacs gingerly pulled out of the parking lot of the Arcadia Brew Pub and entered what seemed like a reasonable gap in westbound traffic on Kalamazoo Avenue. A horn meeped. Was it in front of him or behind him or coming from inside his head? He'd had one double IPA too many. There was something like 10% alcohol in those beers. Dinner with Sarah and Dave had been great. The mid-May evening was warm enough to sit on the pub's patio overlooking the glittering and fast-moving Kalamazoo River. Fluffy seeds blew overhead, passing in and out of bands of horizontal sunlight. A folk guitarist sang incomprehensible lyrics through portable speakers with just the right feeling. He'd feasted on smoked beef brisket, baked beans, and jalapeno cornbread. Bearded Dave told stories with fingers splayed. Angular Sarah made clipped, sardonic comments. They'd had some big laughs. The high inside of Mike's chest felt light, emptied out, scraped clean. Cutting through the mid-rise edge of downtown, the street became one way and picked up a third lane. Another horn meeped. He seemed to have drifted from his lane, or maybe he had not definitively chosen a lane. He would do so now. I accept that you had to meep your horn, he said aloud, flashing his eyes into his rear view. A silver SUV suddenly veered out of the mirror, reappeared much larger on his left, and roared past him. I apologize. He had become extremely happy during dinner, but when the patio filled like a swimming pool with shadow, Sarah had said, well, some of us have to work tomorrow, and grabbed her green handbag from the picnic table. Mike still got his beer, Dave observed mildly to his wife. True. He had about half of a golden 20-ouncer in front of him. Serving sizes were trending larger across multiple beverage types. What did that say about supply? What did that say about demand? Mike foresaw a not-too-distant future when a standard beer would be 50 ounces, cost $30, and come in a Freon-lined tankard. He had wondered if there was a way to get that vision on the record somewhere. No, I totally respect that, Mike had said to Sarah with an ingratiating smile. It was a Thursday night after all, and though Dave and Mike didn't have to teach tomorrow, Sarah had to report for duty in her lab at Pfizer. Mike had thought it would be funny to chug the rest of his beer, just like one of his degenerate students. Mike, 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 Dave chanted while he guzzled, and even Sarah grinned when he'd slammed his empty glass down, eyes watering, and shook his head like a wet dog. The whole evening had been so spontaneous. Mike had learned that his article on monetary policy and financial stability had finally been accepted at the Journal of Economics and Business, a very good venue. Promotion to full professor was at last within reach. He texted the news to Dave and been incredibly gratified when Dave called for a celebratory dinner that very evening because he and Sarah would be at a wedding in Chicago over the weekend. Hanging out with Sarah and Dave gave Mike hope that things were finally getting back to normal after his divorce. They were the first couple that he and Ann, his ex, had really bonded with when they moved to Kalamazoo. Mike and Dave met at the college and brought them all together. Ann sold real estate and could be loud and silly. Sarah developed animal vaccines and was more wry and reserved. Yet, after taking Zumba classes together, Sarah and Ann had become friends on their own terms. And during the unraveling of his marriage, Mike had never been quite sure where Sarah's loyalties lay. He couldn't stand to be the bad guy. Ann's hasty and unceremonious move to Tucson 4 months ago had maybe shifted things with Sarah. When it came up tonight, Mike had predicted that producers of Margarita Mix would soon notice a steep sales drop in Michigan and a corresponding rise in Arizona, and Sarah had allowed herself a laugh. This sign of sympathy created an enormous sense of reprieve. as when a firing squad unexpectedly stands down. Two sets of lights at intersections up ahead turned green at almost the same instant. They were so beautiful. All at once, the high-butted trunk of a crossover loomed in front of him, the lettering on the license plate growing large and clear, like a line on an eye chart brought into sudden focus. He flopped his foot on the brake, braced for impact. The crossover had just begun to accelerate toward the intersection, moving inches away as he came to a skidding stop. He had seen the light change from a distance and assumed the way was clear. Luckily, no one had rear-ended him. Wow, he said to himself. Wow, wow, wow. The irony was that after years of holding back because Anne was sliding into alcoholism, Mike was very drunk now. He'd evidently forgotten how to manage more than one beer. Things had been so shitty for years, but now they were looking up. At this precise moment, they were actually fantastic. He was almost used to being alone in the old cedar-shingled house. His son, Connor, a rising junior at the University of Michigan, wouldn't be coming home for the summer. This was consistent with Connor saying that Mike and Anne had fucked up and made a shit example for him. Connor, like his mother, had a knack for saying blunt and devastating things when stressed. But the real reason was Connor's excellent marketing internship with Google in Ann Arbor. Connor would be fine. And if he used his parents' catastrophic marriage as a negative example, that wouldn't be the worst thing. In any case, Mike didn't want this glorious night to end. He yearned for something beyond Netflixing Breaking Bad episodes back at the house. Maybe he could get laid, or at least meet someone. Why not? He was a single man. 50 years old, yes, but a good 50, a young 50. Mike believed there was no reason to decline physically at his age. For God's sake, a 57-year-old ex-Marine had once set the world record for continuous abdominal planking, 5 hours, 15 minutes, and 15 seconds. Mike could plank for 4 minutes. This meant that he had the potential to increase his plank time approximately 7,800% over the next 7 years. He couldn't be over a hill he'd only just begun to climb. He approached the weird intersection where Kalamazoo Avenue split, 2 lanes juking the S-curve up left and up West Main Hill toward his house, and 1 lane curving to merge with Douglas. At the last second, he made a no-look lane change and swooped onto Douglas. The night wasn't ending. He had always wanted to see the sunset at Saugatuck Dunes State Park. With its ornate tree-limbed driftwood and picturesque boulder 20 yards from shore, it seemed the only place within a 50-mile radius that offered both soulful vistas and the possibility of a sexual encounter. South Haven was closer, due west, but its main beach was like tarmac potholed with teenagers. Saugatuck Dunes was classier. He envisioned a bonfire ringed by single ladies and empty bottles of Pinot Grigio. Divorcees, tragic young widows, wisecracking loners at loose ends. Mike felt fortunate to be living in a golden age for attractive middle-aged women. He saw them everywhere, in his neighborhood, on campus, at the farmer's market. One such bored woman on the edge of the bonfire would invite him over and let him ask her questions about her life. He was dying to know what made people happy and how they dealt with reality. He wondered why he'd never broached such topics more directly with others, including Anne. And if the beach was deserted, the shushing waves and the solitude would still be a thing. He would pass out and sleep on the sand. He would wake up to seagulls landing on him, like morning birds perching on Disney's Cinderella, a scene that was burned into his memory for some reason, nipping his pockets for signs of Cheetos. As he headed north on 131, the sun fell below the horizon, but the air was still lit somehow. In the span of a few miles, he passed a dead deer twisted in the breakdown lane, a tidy lump of inert raccoon, and a licorice braid of shorn truck tire tread. Why were such objects never in the middle of the freeway? Why always carefully arranged to the side, parallel to traffic even, as if pointing the way? Why not remove altogether versus rearrange? The dashboard clock said it was 9:17. Dusk came late and took forever in this gently hilly and randomly forested edge of the Eastern time zone. The park would probably be closed when he got there, though running into the sort of people who would defy such rules seemed promising. The air conditioning suddenly seemed too cool, and he noticed the outside temperature was dropping into the low 60s, but he had a college hoodie in the back seat. He exited 131 and took M89 west through Otsego, a dense commercial strip with a Meijer and a Walmart, a discount flooring and a Tractor Supply. Lights passed over his car like a great bright hand stroking a cat. He was the cat. He turned off the AC and cracked his windows. The night air was humid and indeed cooling. On the other side of Otsego, he got up to speed again, rolling past the Links golf course through a sudden bank of ground fog that barred the road. Then on a straightaway, he saw patches of fog that were strangely discreet and well organized, hovering masses about 1 story tall, no taller, taking the shape of long corridors or a whole warehouse-like building, hovering over low-lying areas in the undulating earth. It was as if clouds had come in for a landing, or maybe this was how clouds were born before they rose up and took their place in the sky. His dash said 59 degrees, but he was undaunted. By the time he was on M40 heading toward Holland, the darkness had thickened and the ground fog was a problem. If it didn't sober him up, it at least focused him. But he still looked forward to the lake, which he now hoped would be eerie or surreal under the hazy moon. Shoals of cloud dissipated just when he worried he couldn't see well enough to drive. Then on the outskirts of Holland appeared Bruce's Party Store, fronting a tremendous sheer roof and windows blinded with beer prices. The parking lot lights seemed to disperse the fog. He went due west on 141st Avenue, then came back south on 65th Street, overshooting the road that led into the park. He had to stop and back up to make the turn. It was full night now, just after 10 p.m. He was in a maze of fog banks and clear ground. He wound down the road, broke through wisps into wider visibility, and saw the park ranger hut, unmanned at this hour, of course, and no chain across the entrance. He bore right to enter the horseshoe parking lot, passing under a large overhanging tree, and suddenly found himself encased in an unsolid cotton ball of indeterminate magnitude. 6 feet in front of his car, his headlights combined with fog to make a luminous white wall. A tandem bicycle materialized through the wall in his path like the Wicked Witch of the West suddenly pedaling by Dorothy's spinning house. 2 people on the bike lit abruptly as when a picture is taken. A young man on the front seat, polo shirt, plaid board shorts, backwards ball cap, a woman on the back seat in an open, oversized white button-up shirt, the tail of which was lifted by her bare thigh as it rose with the bike pedal. The man's face was panicked, eyes magically locking on Mike's eyes through the windshield. The woman's eyes were closed in what looked like dreamy laughter, but could have been something else. Beach gear crammed into the side baskets. He grasped it all in an instant.
I think we've all made that drive, so it's never been so magical. That was great. Jo Campbell is a native of Comstock and the author of 2 novels and 2 short story collections. She teaches creative writing at the Low Residency Master of Fine Arts program at Pacific University in Portland, Oregon. A movie based on her novel, Once Upon the River, will premiere on May 10th at the Bentonville Film Festival. Jo Campbell.
Do I have to? I can talk loud enough, can I? Okay, good. All right, I'm really nervous because I never read this. This is my new novel here. It's called Donkey. And those of you who know me know all about Donkey and me. So Donkey is the girl's name, so that's how Donkey gets into it. But she's a young mathematician, and I keep going back between having a prologue and not having a prologue. So my current thought is I start out with a mathematician's note. And it's a very young mathematician, but I'm only going to read a little portion of it. And then I'm going to start on the first chapter. So, should I be nervous reading you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh, it's very exciting. I know, and if my phone goes off, Deborah's going to take it over. I can't find it. It's in my bag. I'm like a bag lady. I've got like cans and bottles I've been collecting and stuff. Can't find the phone. Mathematician's note. If you love logic, do not read this book about my batshit family, because your nut will probably explode. But if you are one of those illogical people who love words so much that you want to marry them, then go ahead. But don't say I didn't warn you. Once upon a time, when I was only 3,546 days old, I was sitting upright in a vinyl reclining chair by the window in room 225 of the Kalamazoo County Hospital, talking to Granny's cage of bones. Back then, I hated almost all words, hated all those sneaky, snaky syllables about as much as I hated my slithery dreams. But I wasn't allowed to touch herself, or jostle the bed, or shout whoop loud enough to shake loose a bird's nest the way I did on the island. And until Granny woke up, my eggs would have to stay in Aunt Molly's basket, a basket I wanted out of ASAP. Outside the window, morning sunshine lit up a mowed graveyard where the shadows of 279 gravestones stretched out so far they bumped into other stones. Unlike Granny, I hated dead people, and I didn't want them to talk to me in my sleep. I reclined the chair from 90 degrees to about 127, a prime number, until all I could see was sky. This was the view I had at home while lying on the back of our donkey Aster, with my head on her butt and my feet crossed over her withers, balancing until she got fed up and bucked me off. Or until Granny said, "Stop being lazy like your mama and help me with these cabbages." Granny, you won't believe this. Aunt Molly's cats piss in boxes, I said to the sky. Inside her tin can, I'm not joking. My sniffer is ruined, and I'm not supposed to call her trailer a tin can. A cloud drifted into my field of vision in the woodchuck shape of Aunt Molly. Until now, Granny had protected me from my aunt, also protected me from lead poisoning and anything else that would cause brain damage. She also healed my wounds and kept me from starving 3 times a day. Now, though, her solid old tree bear of a body didn't even snore in reply. I went and stood in the doorway and sniffed for boys, then returned to the bed. What was left of Granny's right arm, after 5/8 of it got hacked off by the devil doc, was a gauze-covered 3/8 that I wasn't supposed to go near. Same as I wasn't supposed to go near the tubes coming out of her nose and left arm, same with the machine that measured her blood pressure every 30 seconds and now showed in red 124/72. Being out here in nowhere was strange enough, away from the muck and moss and fog and frog song and pollen, plus away from our old dog Ozma and milk cow Betty, but seeing her conked out, dope flowing into her veins, oxygen puffing up her nose, was like the worst page in a fairy story. Granny had lost her moldy lavender lilac smell, and she even looked different here. Her hair was not white as it had seemed on the island, not when compared to the hospital sheets and pillowcases, nor was it silver when compared to the gleaming stainless steel rails on the bed. But her long, unbraided hair was violet gray as a storm sky, and her sassafras bark-colored freckles were starting to fade after only 3 days. She still had the hematoma on her wrist, purple-red like a sumac leaf, from when they strapped her down in the ER. "Molly says you aren't dying, Granny. She said nobody's dying for crying out loud, but I told her everybody's dying someday. People are finite, and their timeline is a timeline segment." Thinking about her not dying made me think about her dying, and I had to open the package of 55 M&Ms I planned to share with the boys. I ate one of each color, orange, dark brown, tan, yellow, green, and then I ate 49 more until there was only one candy left. "Do you want this green one, Granny?" I asked, and held out the last discoid an inch from her chapped lips, and then a half an inch, and then a 1/4 inch. But But even awake, Granny didn't like candy, so I ate that one too. Titus, our neighbor, had let me pick these out at the vending machine this morning, like the last 2 mornings, when he stopped by to report on milking Betty. Granny, don't you want to say get out of my hair, donkey? I asked. You haven't said it for 3 days. My talking all the time had never been Granny's idea, and I didn't say a word to any person until I was 5 years old. Until Aunt Molly bustled over the bridge one day and said she was taking me to have my head examined. Granny knew I could talk because I talked to trees and creatures. The first thing I'd said from under the kitchen table where I was hiding from her was a true thing. 2 eggs and 2 eggs is 4 eggs. Then I said I was hungry. And then I asked Molly if she would make me a cousin. Don't die today, Granny, I said, and leaned against the foot end of the bed for a second before pulling away. No alarm went off. You know I hate dead people. Herself didn't care if somebody was alive or dead, so long as that person was poor Mama Rose, my great-grandmother, who told her how to cure a pox, or a flux, or when to boil bloodroot. I leaned against the end of the bed again and lifted the sheet and blanket to remind myself of what that ugly left foot looked like. It was still huge, gray-purple as a bruise with its ogre's toenails and calloused sole, caved in on the top because of Aster breaking the bones with her hoof. As a baby, I would drink only ass milk, nothing else. And because Aster's foal died instead of me dying, Granny buried her in the garden and named me Donkey. She never once called me Dorothy, which was fine with me. Only a few freckles trickled down from Granny's ankle. She went barefoot in summer like I did until the ground froze because a shoe pained her. Nurses had put socks on her twice, but she'd agitated, rubbed her feet together in her sleep, so the socks came off. Ropey blue veins snaked across the broken part of that old foot and crossed to make an X that stuck out and invited me to poke it. And I reached out and I got closer and closer, and an eruption of laughter from the hall saved me. The boys! I left herself and headed down the hall, glancing into every room with an open door. Each contained at least one person who'd gotten herself butchered and drugged and laid out like Granny, which was a lesson to not let anybody see your wounds. I kept my own scrapes and bruises under jeans and Titus's army jacket. In room 267, the waiting room, I found 3 brothers sprawled in front of the TV in clean blue jeans and complicated athletic shoes. The boys had shocks of shiny brown hair and no freckles to protect them. While they had different weights, Devil Nurse Anna had weighed us all yesterday. They seemed otherwise all the same to me. The way minnows in a silvery school seemed the same, trapped in a shrinking swamp pool after a rain, just waiting to get eaten by a duck or a snapping turtle. The boys were watching the loony cartoon animals, and though I watched along with them from the doorway, my nut did not explode, as Granny had predicted. Already from watching yesterday, I'd seen a devil could be Tasmanian, a trickster coyote was funny, and a witch sent hairpins flying out of her head. These jokes made me question some of the other warnings Granny had about nowhere. Now I saw in the tube that Hansel and Gretel were about as chubby as the witch with the hairpins who imprisoned them. No wonder she wanted to eat them. Yesterday, these boys told me about White Hart's Elementary and about Frankenstein's monster, a kind of ghost who kept coming at you with its arms out, trying to handle you. In exchange, I told them about Einstein's noodle living in a jar in Pennsylvania, and how, when you ate a whole animal by yourself, even if you chopped it to pieces, it would come back together inside you. This was why I had to eat at least a bite of everything Granny cooked, so she didn't eat the whole thing. What animals do you talk to? I asked the boys, as the show was shrinking to a circle, smaller and smaller. Turtles? Talking to animals is retarded, the 96-pound boy said confidently from the couch and pointed his gun at me. It was made of tongue depressors and rubber bands wrapped in white medical tape. When I'd asked Aunt Molly that question, she said, "Just don't tell me they talk back to you, Dorothy, or I'll have your knucklehead examined." Do you know what's the biggest number? I asked, taking a few steps into the room. "A trillion, billion, gazillion," the 81-pound boy lying on the floor said. "Be logical," I said. "A trillion, billion, gazillion plus 1 is bigger." "Pew, pew, pew," the boy with the gun said from his reclining position. "You have to fall down and die now, girl." "I forgot," I said, and then fell in front of the TV with such conviction that I forgot I was falling on a terrazzo floor instead of on Mama Rose's mossy grave. And that was when they noticed the calculator sticking out of the pocket of Titus's jacket. Like my shoes, it had come from the left behind box, and Molly said I could have it. The 81-pound boy launched himself across the floor to grab it, and after a stunned moment, I scrambled up and followed him into the hall, slapping in my big shoes. Devil Nurse Anna stuck her head out of the nurse's station and said, "Walk, don't run." And so we all four walked quickly with stiff legs to the waste chute the boys had pried open yesterday. I'd already decided that when my life was my own, I'd have the rule, run, don't walk. Then the 96-pound boy grabbed my arms and held them behind my back. "Let me go. Say you hate math." The 81-pound boy was now dangling my calculator by 2 fingers above the waist chute. "No," I shouted. I didn't know what was worse, being handled or not having my calculator. "Give it back." "If you love math so much, you should marry it," the smallest boy said. He weighed 69 pounds. When he tried to tie my braids in a knot, I finally twisted free and lunged for my calculator. The kid holding it let go, let the thing tumble to the molten center of the planet. "I wasn't really going to drop it, you retard," he said. "You knocked it out of my hand, and you better not tell my mom." I opened the little door of the chute to look down into that dark place. I reached in almost up to my elbow, and then my arm was stuck. Heat rose up from the center of the planet into my fist and up my arm. "I hate you. Your granny's a witch and a snake eater, and you are too," the kid said. "And if Grandma Ada dies, it's that witch's fault." "I'm not a snake eater," I said, furiously and evenly, as I clenched my fist and tugged to free myself. What they'd said made no sense. Granny saved people. She spent hours every day making cures, including the heart medicine for their great granny, Mrs. McIntyre. "Snake eater, the little kid repeated until the others joined in. The kid who'd been holding my arms broke the rhythm to whisper, "And your mom is a whore." "I'm not a snake eater. I'm a mathematician," I said, and that heat from the center of the planet was now snaking up the curve of my spine, a vertebrae at a time. I clenched and yanked again and pinched myself good. "And you're all going to die someday," I said, "all of you, and then you will be dead forever." "Dorothy, be nice," came Aunt Molly's voice from behind me. The boys ran and I yanked again. "Walk, don't run," she said after them, and they slowed. Molly told me to stop making a fist, and we pulled my arm out, a very clever nurse trick. And she said, "Stop putting my hand where it didn't belong and take care of my things if I didn't want to lose them, and also stop drawing on my arm with ink. Didn't Anna give me some paper?" She bustled beside me back to room 900 divided by 4, glancing once at the pager in the pocket of her turquoise nurse smock. If Granny had been awake, she would have said, "You're going to lose a lot more than that calculator in this life, so stop your belly aching." "I want to get my notebook from the island," I said. "Can I sleep there tonight?" "A 9-year-old isn't sleeping alone on that damn island," Molly said, and jiggled Granny's .9 saline solution bag. I was a lot older than 9 years, but there weren't many other places I could go other than Molly's tin can, since I didn't want to spend my days in California with Rose Thorne getting swallowed by an earthquake or left behind in a tavern, and definitely not in Chicago with my terrible Aunt Primrose, number 2, who would hold me prisoner in a tower and send me to school where other kids would knock me down and teachers would pull my hair when I made a mistake. I wasn't to say this aloud because it was fixating. "Maybe I should stay here with Granny tonight and keep my eyeball on her," I suggested. "It's my fault that she burned herself, and I don't have any cousin to help me." "Stop fixating," Molly said. "You're Your granny's here because she's stubborn, and you're stubborn too. You're two peas in a pod. The whole thing was my fault, starting with the rattlesnake I imagined seeing, even if Molly, number 3, forbade me saying it. Where is Granny's arm now? I asked. Now, why haven't you opened your present from Prim? Molly said, and picked up from the counter the little bag with the handles that I had been ignoring. She peered inside and rustled the tissue paper. Look, it's a book. Your aunt brought you a book all the way from Chicago. I hate books, I said, and flattened myself against the wall. Especially, I hated a book from somebody on a high horse who would kidnap me. I moved sideways along the wall toward the window to maximize the distance between me and Molly, until I tripped over the cord to the blood pressure machine and stumbled and caught myself by grabbing the curtain cord and yanking the curtains fully open. She snorted and shook her head. This book looks interesting. It's right up your alley. It's called Imagine Math. I don't have to imagine math, I said, and swooshed the curtain shut. Math is real.
Bonnie? Our final reader is Oliver Baez Bendorf, born and raised in Iowa. Oliver Baez Bendorf is the author of 2 full-length collections of poetry, Advantages of Being Evergreen, which is forthcoming from CSU Poetry Center in September 2019, and The Spectral Wilderness from Kent State University, 2015, which was selected by Mark Dottie as the Stan and Tom Wick Poetry Prize. He holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and is an assistant professor of poetry at Kalamazoo College.
Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Thank you so much for having me, and to all of you for coming. The fear right before a reading is always oscillating between no one will be there and a lot of people will be there. And the room is full, but I prefer that. It's a pretty good option. Bad luck. I'm going to read a handful of poems from Advantages of Being Evergreen, which is the book coming out in September. I don't know if they have to do with I think they do. It's a variety of afflictions, and ways that we sort of rise and try to cope with them. And then I'm going to also read some newer stuff after that, and the whirlwind of afflictions that we will be going through all together. It ranges from, the more mundane but still intolerable ones like writer's block and heartache and rejection, to more lethal ones like destruction of habitat and fire, epidemics, extinction. So, we're all in it together, which sort of comes back in the poems also. So. We'll start light with heartache. Who spit into the pumpkin? Who they waiting for? No rooster in town, at least not in earshot. A pumpkin decomposes on the bank, and I know to bring a lover back, you need 5 nails of a rooster before you cast a pumpkin into the river. I have given up, I think, on unrestricted love, but not the search. Something happens under the bridge. I come up singing. The egg was the easy part with all the hens. Pepper, marjoram, easy. But those rooster nails, I wait years. I wait my entire life. No one teaches a mother spell, but isn't that what every spell is for? What I want from the river is what I always want, to be held by a stronger thing that in the end chooses mercy. when I was working on this manuscript back in December 2016, so that's a month after the election, and I was at a writing residency, and there was a fire that broke out at a warehouse in Oakland, which was not just a warehouse, but also was being used as a kind of artist collective, and that place was called Ghost Ship. And 36 people who were there died. Many of them were, working class artists, writers, members of the LGBT community, which I am also. And I was just sort of thinking about this irony of our instinct to huddle together, which often feels like it will keep us safe, just makes a density of us when there's catastrophe. So. Ghost ship novena inside a year-long funeral. My God, our prayer go 9 fucking days, Dios mío, Dios mío, Dios mío. My God, my God, my God, my God. That was how we pray, all we knew. 9 days we drift downstream like that, count prayers on a rip-rap rosary. Fire, you good-for-nothing mother, fucker, all you do is burn. Drained of salt, we let eddies rock us bank to bank. After a while, we stop asking. Sometimes, on our saddest days, the river lift up almost to the bridge. On our saddest days, the river on the bridge. River we build, river swell up to the belly. On our worst days, we stop asking. We brown white as one body again in fields of moon snow. We assemble fields of stubble, fields of thread. Because we've known ourselves as throwaway already, we do not dispose. Kept, we say, and we mean it. Some of us full moon hearts wept one another to sleep just to hear something like the river again, not knowing our tears was the river which we had left in body, old wild sounds become barnboard. So I had been on the road for a long time and felt like, poems were just piling up inside of me. And I finally landed for where I was spending the summer in Brooklyn, and I was like, now I can write, And I was staying near this playground called Oracle Playground. And I was like, I'm going to go write at Oracle Playground, and that will be so perfect, right? The poems will flow out. They will flow out. And that's not what happened. So this is the writer's block poem. Oracle. Sorry I missed your message. I have no excuse except the kava numbed my tongue again. Sure, only for a moment. Honestly, felt I was deep underwater, awash in sunlight's movements through canopy birch. I have come to the playground to work. Yes, it seems I have this backward. Children in neckties sort papers on a bench. Why? I think I've come back already as something else. What am I still doing in this park? Pockets full of coconut meat, scars where my breasts used to be. Dear fish bones, dear open hose, today I am a static channel carrying the weight of logic. This poem, I was thinking about just the different sides of my family and kind of trying to make sense of like colonizer and colonized through the bloodlines ending up in the same person with the added mix of what I call my queer side. And I think the only thing you need to know about this one is that in the very last line you'll hear the acronym GRID, and that stands for gay-related immune disease, which is like what they first called it. It's called Settle or Unsettled. My blood, a prophet in a medieval castle with his people. Been flogged in the streets, books burned, driven out of town by an angry mob. My blood, his people who came and built a colony on Buffalo Creek Reservation, believing they had bought it, that their money, $10.50 per acre, plus another $900 for a year of peace, granted them land, even though they had no deed, no deed, no deed. And in the house that once sheltered daydreams for the sawmill operator, now the prophet, 24 years old, who possessed a gift of inspiration, could see and hear, had a scribe for when inspiration struck, thereby bridging the gap between idea and the written word, though forking off the handwritten from the prayer. Strive for simplicity. Let your yes be yes and no be no. Never take an oath. And the white men in my blood felled Seneca's trees to build villages, and for all they heard, did not hear no. My indigenous Caribbean blood sent kinship through the mother line, and some lived open-hearted, lay down with many, as I do, and women and children lived with women and children apart from men. My Spanish blood, who came and took Taino women to lie with, as many as they possibly could, Dr. Chanka wrote. Conquest for gold, my blood no immunity. O God of chaos, which was he, doing unto or done unto him? God settle or unsettled in my blood. And Michelle and Maria, who fled the boot spur to Montreal, where I saw a glorious drag show once, it was so sincere. Undocumented to Chicago, no papers, only prayers. Who writes this all down? Who remembers? A coffee bean is actually a seed. A deed is a legal instrument, meaning evidence. I'm out here conjuring someone else's empty stream for my side, some knowing when to leave, others removed. But every queer is the family scribe, right? Go back any blood far enough and you'll see a communal kitchen. Never went to sleep completely, kept watch, fished at night, all-night rituals to be conducted. First order of the day was ritual bathing and prayers. Morning meal of bread dipped in the communal pepper pot. I don't bathe every day, forget to pray, eat meals alone, have never planted corn on a hillside during new moon or carved a canoe from a single tree trunk. Sure, I handpicked through gravel along water's edge, never found gold though. And the Spanish introduced homophobia to the Taino, and the Seneca were made to move along. And Billy Graham said that AIDS might be God's punishment, and a third of U.S. Americans agreed with him. And women took care of men who were dying, and a virus infected the cells, used them as a place to multiply. Grid, it was never not my battle. Okay, I'm going to read some new stuff that it was sort of a triangulation of, what I said about the ghost ship fire and what I was thinking about, like, the instinct of huddling and, like, how, is it better to be all together when catastrophe strikes, at least, right, than to be alone and maybe safe? I don't know. So I was thinking about that, and then I read online this story from 2016 about how lightning struck in this isolated corner of Norway and killed an entire herd of reindeer, 323 of them. And, some just reading and thinking about extinction brought into the mix, which is like human extinction maybe would be a really good thing for the planet, but not so lucky for humans. So this next stuff is just, it's kind of all one sequence. Without individual titles, so I'm just gonna finish with that, and I don't think there's anything else to say about it. So just dive in, and these first two images. Oh, all of those things sort of coalesced at this moment when I was just kind of, I think I had just loaded the dishwasher, honestly, and I was staring at the compost bowl in the kitchen, which was starting to rot. Apple core, ivy leaf. Reading about how the world is dying, literally, for us to pile and become nutrient again. Give back to the wild what we've taken, break down. What decomposition does for the earth. Our beautiful home, Omelas, where some put children in cages, and microbursts of detail wither under human thumb. Well, here I am, as my family tradition dictates, to transcribe as faithfully as possible the last hours of humans who seem to be on borrowed time. First of all, lightning strikes 332 reindeer in Norway, and all felled are all felled. First, an expanse of rock, or what looks like rock. Upon inspection, each boulder has legs and is, in fact, dead. That's the photograph. First, on a mountain. They huddle together due to thunder and pellets of rain. The ground becomes electrified due to lightning fast as lightning. Blown surge. First, it's instantaneous through their hooves. Now, nature runs its course, and humans set up cameras to watch. Scavengers spread crowberry seeds around the site, and humans saw off the reindeer's heads at the neck for research, and foxes and ravens come, and the soil decimated under the reindeer carcasses is exactly what the crowberry needs to germinate, and the crowberry feeds the Arctic animals, and lightning comes for us all when we huddle far from shelter. For example, at a gathering in the woods where we are all huddled, can you imagine the positions the coyotes will find us in? Imagine what the raccoon will see. Finally. Ground would have been soggy, good conductor. In the last hours, no one witnessed the herd's instinct to huddle together, which the scientists would say backfired, except it meant they went together. Their own bodies, perfect receptacles for all that electricity. For a species at the brink, we're uncomfortable with our own putridity. Carrion flower, our annual reminder that it comes for us all. What comes after distinction? Nothing about us without us. No, after extinction, nothing about us. Who would even remember? Selfie sticks locked in ancient lava. No children, not for naught. Knotty sand grasshopper, which they named it, lives in only 4 places in the area they named southern Spain and Portugal, and now they're putting a hotel and a golf course there. Tonight we think of you, golden toad, no longer with us on this plane. Last seen May 15th, 1989 in Cloud Forest, and not a single one of you since. Decomposed? You lived underground. You came up once a year to mate in piggybacks and puddles. Smooth orange skin, halfway translucent, Sunny D poured into a mold. Indiscriminate acts to hurtle your species into the future. Possible to foil this extinction through propagation? No, the population's the problem. Too many humans. Still, not likely to go quietly. Brenda says it's relaxation time, but not like that. Not long now. Be the carbon and the green. No one there to identify their bones at the scene. Just no one there at all except sun, moon, woolly mammoth, and the moon's moons, and probably roaches, rats, pigeons, and squirrels. Burrowing was supposed to be in one's favor, unlike huddling together on land, but it comes for us all. Huddled together at the gay bar, parade, campus, theater, potluck, funeral. Oop, making it about them again. Golden Toad, last known mating episode, 1987, year I was born. Oop. Golden Toad, Golden Toad. Thank you for returning your infinite matter to the biosphere. Meant gone for good when they crossed genders, but dagger was a viable option. Turf wars made possible through destruction of habitat. Whose land is it anyway? That was the name of the show. There were parts, desires, and expressions severed for the sake of legibility. In the last hours, they dropped down into a we for once, before circling back to an open field, against which they spent condensory dollars folding into numinous mess. What an experiment. What an experience. We see our previous plunder and pet the head of it. Daily, a thin skate of ice formulates, must be macheted apart. Future keeps arriving along with pounds of salt, applied to openness, healing. What we remember most isn't the bitter of extinction. It's the dailiness of danger, desire. Tia says that's what conflict is. The utter dailiness of lick-lapping deer while a storm assembles. Sorry to change it again, Mom, but we're giving up singular pronouns. Sorry to change it again, but we're going by Anthropocene now. Sorry, but climate change is real and it is caused by human activity. Sorry to change it again, but your favorite animal? Extinct. Sorry to change it again, but the planet is really purging us. So sorry to interrupt. Sorry, but sorry, sorry. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions for our authors? Just want to sit and admire them.
Well, I want to say something to Oliver. I love that phrase, the last hours of humans. Have you offered that to Margaret Atwood for her new title?
Okay, well, currently that project of mine is called Last Hours, Decomposition. And I got the phrase last hours talking to my uncle, who was telling me that that side of the family had this as a practice of, and that's the Iowa side that was part of this commune called the Amana Colonies, if anyone's familiar.
Oh, yeah.
And they did this thing called the last hours where when people in the community were dying, they would just have like a writer sit with them and take notes of what was happening. And my uncle told me about that while all of this other stuff about extinction looming was in the stew. So just kind of latched on to that.
My second comment was, the phrase that came to mind was, when bad people happen to a great planet. So maybe that's her next.
Just too many.
With some balance mixed in.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, where did you come up with the donkey gal?
Oh, the mathematician girl?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, I was writing about, I was trying to write a novel about an older mathematician, a woman who's in college, and,
So a
and
real person,
what's that?
a real person.
A real person, but then I realized I was very interested in how she got there. And it's funny because, you know, I wrote that novel Q Road, and then I went back and I said, gosh, how did that woman get there? And I went back and wrote Once Upon a River. So I have another pair of novels again, I guess. But I'm just very interested in a 10-year-old girl who lives with a crazy granny. And I'm really interested in just writing about women right now. I just want to write about women. I want to write about women. I'm reading all this Jungian stuff about, you know, I'm trying to figure out, there's not enough female anything in the world, as far as I can tell. And so I'm just having a blast writing it, and not kind of writing for the first time ever without any apology for writing about women. Because I do feel that in the past when I've written about women, I've always been kind of careful, making sure to include the guys. And so this time I'm just kind of I'm like, it's my party, so who knows, maybe it won't be any fun party, but you can come. You can come. And anyway, when people, you know, a lot of people want me to come talk to their kids about writing, and I always say no, come talk to their daughters about writing, and I always refuse. I come and talk to them about math. I do, I'm like, study math, that's how you make money. Don't go into writing.
This kind of leads into a question I have for you, Bonnie. How long have you known you were a writer? You know, probably.
Oh, I tried not to write for years. I always wanted to write, and I was like, this is too competitive, and it's like, I knew I wasn't smart enough, and so I didn't really take writing. I mean, I kept trying not to write, and I got lots of I studied other things, and studied mathematics, and so I guess when I was about 36, Jamie Gordon told me I was a good writer, and that I could try to write, so she gave me permission. I know, isn't that the great thing about writing though? It's like you don't have to be young. Everything else in the world is better when you're young, and writing is actually not better when you're young.
Maybe a conductor you can do do for a long time. as a writer. You can't make, like Mary Card, you know, that author, she's asked at readings, can you make money as a writer? And her answer is, oh yes, hundreds of dollars a year.
Can I ask Andy, is that chapter you read from the beginning of the book?
It's the very beginning, yeah.
And the title is Tandem?
Yeah.
And the trouble occurs right there,
Yeah.
right there.
That's what you're talking about. Get the trouble in there right away.
So Andy, where are you in your novel? Have you written most of it and just read us the first part, or are you still progressing on through it?
3/4 of the way drafted.
Woohoo!
Cool.
Is that the part where you're just telling the story to yourself?
I'm just trying to put it down for the first, get all the way to the end and then revise it.
Because that was marvelous.
Thank you.
How about Bonnie? How far are you?
Oh, I'm one of those people who like writes and then rewrites like 500 times, so.
Have you gotten to the end?
Oh, yeah. I know, finally I know. Well, you know, I figured out finally what the problem is. Other people like write a novel. You know, the sculptor who says has a big chunk of marble? That's what I have to first create a big chunk of marble with words. So I create a whole world, and then I have to chip away. I have like 600 pages, you know, of this, and so I have to now chip it away and find the story in it. But I first had to build the marble. It's not very efficient.
Way to do it. Deb, are you working on something new?
Oh yes, kind of like Mary Carr with the hundreds of dollars a year. I think I have 5 pages of a second novel, so someday there may be 6 pages. And it'll be much more autobiographical. This one is not. Normally first novels are very autobiographical, but Half-Life of Everything is not, except in pretty trivial ways. Like, yeah, I use a lot of Post-its. I have 2 very smart sons, and, you know, my husband knows a lot of history and stuff like that. And he loads the dishwasher horribly. But it's not an autobiographical novel, but this new one would be much more so.
I have a question for you. You mentioned a workshop. Where did you go? Can you talk about the workshop you chose?
Yeah, I found it really hard to start writing a novel. It's like I had my idea, and it's like I just didn't have the discipline. So I started taking an online creative writing workshop through Stanford, and that was very effective because I'm very obedient. If there's a deadline, I'm right there with the work. And so I did that for the first few chapters. I don't remember exactly at what page I was able to say, I don't mean to keep paying somebody, you know. And of course, you get great feedback too. I mean, it's good not just for the deadline. So I don't think it would have happened without taking that workshop to get started.
How did you find an agent, or did you send it out cold? Like, how did you go about it?
Well, you know, your hope is that she'll sign a snazzy agent, and it looked like that was going to happen quite easily at first. I got a lot of interest and good letters, and make these revisions, and you know, send it back to me. And but then that went on for a while, and luckily somebody Andy had put me in contact with said, you know, agents really like to flirt, so you have to be careful. And they also, I think they like to like sort of tie you up so you don't go somewhere else, even though they're not. Anyway, so I did that for quite a while, and then one agent who had really, really liked the book and kept it forever, she said, because I just wanted to take you on, but I don't think I can sell it to one of the big 5 publishers. And she said, don't revise, start sending to small publishers. And I just trusted her. I felt like she kind of knew more than I did. And then that went fairly quickly once I started submit. But there's a lot of small publishers you need an agent for too, so you have to look for the ones that don't require an agent. That's not the fun part. I mean, the compliments and the nice letters are good, but there's a lot of just, they don't reply anymore. Or if if you don't hear from us in 30 days, it means no, that kind of thing. So, that's not.
How long did it take you to write the book?
I think maybe about 2 years to get a decent first draft, and then, of course, many revisions after that while querying and submitting. So from start to publication, about 7 years.
I have a question for our poet. Do you like Cape Cod? And how do you like the students at King?
Oh, well, at least one of mine is here. I love to teach, and the students have been awesome so far. So, pretty good.
What state did you move from?
Wisconsin.
Okay, so this winter was not a shock.
Well, somehow still it was, you know.
The less sunshine.
Yeah, but not quite as cold.
For Bonnie, I love the image of you chipping away at a very big piece of stone. And why, some time ago, I read that an author, when asked, well, how do you know what a character is going to say? And he says, well, I don't know until they say it, until they tell me. Do your characters tell you, chip away a little over here, or you need a little bit of something?
I know, I don't, a lot of people say that, oh, my characters make the decisions, and I don't, it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't ever feel like that. It feels like I'm doing it, but it's my unconscious doing it often. I mean, it's my unconscious. None of us would write, if we had to do it all consciously, we couldn't do it, because you couldn't make every decision and every word if you had to do that. So you have to just be in a state where things are kind of flowing. And so I think it's just that way of talking about it, like the characters are doing the work. I think that's just another way of talking about that things are flowing. And the reason I worry a little bit when people say things like that is just because then you feel bad if it doesn't happen for you when you're writing. I mean, there's a lot of writers who will tell you how to write. And every time they do that, or tell you how it has to be, and it worries me so much, because I just want people to know that they can write however they write, and that there's all kinds of ways to see the writing process. Some people say never write with your intellectual brain. Robert Owen Butler says that, and he says it, he means it. You can only write from your fiery, white hot center, which I think is right here, but I don't know, maybe creamy, delicious white center.
That was a Twinkie. That was
about
It had nothing to do with writing. I'm sorry. That's why don't ask me anything.
But if you chip away at that Twinkie, if you just chip away at it, then you're all creamy white centers.
What about with revising? Would you say you use when you revise? Would you say you use more conscious mind?
I mean, that's what I would tell people is even if if you were not going to allow that kind of intellectual writing, I mean, if you didn't use your intellectual writing, I mean, there's so many very intellectual writers and these kind of sciencey, like Ruth Ozeki and Andrea Barrett. I mean, some of our favorite writers are very intellectual, and it's a great part of their writing. And so it just seems like a kind of odd thing to say at all. But I would say if nothing else, then I for sure with the revising it takes. But that also, I used to deny that what I did was an art. I used to say, oh no, I'm just a craft. But then if it was just a craft, then you could actually learn how to do it, and then you would just do it. But so obviously, it really is about feeling your way through it. It's really from beginning to end, every stage in the process is about feeling your way through it and what feels right. And it's the hardest thing because a lot of us writers, really insecure people. I mean, not these guys, but me. And so, some other people I know. But so it's very hard to trust yourself to trust that this is the way it feels right. And so maybe that's how some of us learn to exist in the world is by existing in the written page and finding a way that it works. And then when that feels right, then maybe we go out in the world and people will like us or talk to us anyway.
I'll talk to you more.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
I have a question for Andy. When did you know that you were a writer?
Gosh, I don't know if it ever happened, really. I mean, that's a hard question. I really can't answer that. I mean, I wanted to try to do it. There was a point at which I said I want to do it whether I can or not, and maybe that was the moment I was born.
Did you in law school for a while?
Yeah.
When did you know you weren't a lawyer?
Discovering that's what I should have been as a lawyer. That's what I naturally do. I naturally litigate. But now I'm stuck writing stories, so I don't know what to do now. There's no going back.
So this is something for all of you. When do you know, or are you comfortable now saying, I'm good at this? Or have you gotten to that point? Because, you're sort of talking about insecurities or maybe never. Are you at the point where you can say, is it an acceptance from X being interviewed on NPR, or is it something, internal?
Your attention, please. The library will be closing in 30 minutes. Please begin to make your final material selections at this time. If you need to apply for a library card, please visit the regulation desk located
The writers will
on
leave back in their cages.
the library computer will automatically shut down and end all use 15 minutes before closing. Thank you.
Well, I personally will not think I'm a writer until I am interviewed on NPR. It's clear to me that will never happen, so kind of limbo. But I think it's possible to like your writing and find fault with it at the same time. And I totally understand why, like, movie directors or actors won't watch their movies because they just can't stand seeing how it could have been better. And I feel that way even though, I think I did a pretty good job when I have to take sections, to doing a reading. I'm like, really? You thought that sentence was your final best version of that? What were you thinking? So I think it is a constant balance of, yeah, I'm pretty good at this and what, try harder.
Or maybe having more maybe we feel like we have more tools, we have a lot of the tools, and we've used those tools a little bit more so that we know that when something, let's say, isn't working, which happens for all of us, that we know what directions to go and what to do about it to try to make it better. We still all write, I don't know, I shouldn't say that, but most of us are still perfectly capable of writing not great things. So.
A question for everybody, I guess. Do you find that the thing that you're working on at the moment is your favorite thing usually? Would you usually think that whatever book or poem you're working on, that's better than the stuff you've done before, or not? No?
My fiction maneuver is too small to give me that.
Well, this touches on this is on the previous question and also a little bit on this one. I feel like my tolerance for writing things that I don't feel that great about has increased a little bit. That still means that there's plenty of that, but I think of it sort of like, the faucet. Well, living in Kalamazoo, maybe you're familiar with this. Like when you turn on the faucet and it's running brown, the first instinct is just to turn it off again. And if I haven't been writing for a while, that's what it feels like when I first start to write. And I feel like if anything, like that still happens all the time, but if anything now, I'm a little bit better at like just leaving the faucet on, i.e. continuing to write, like knowing that it will run clear if I don't shut it off and run screaming and never pick up the pen again. And also, like, sometimes the thing that I'm working on, right, when I write it, I'm like, well, what is that thing? And if I sleep on it and come back to it tomorrow, I might feel really excited about it. In a week, like it might shift in a week, so it's kind of always changing. I mean, there are definitely some poems of mine where I'm like, oh yeah, I love reading those poems. I feel like, how did I write that? Like, where did that come from in an exciting way? But other poems, it's sort of, I'll forget about it and then come across, and then, yeah. Other ones, it kind of feels like it shifts around a little bit. So, yeah.
Yeah, for me, sometimes when I'm like in working on this novel, because it's kind of big. I mean, it's big and full of potential. And I think for novelists, this often, if you're a big messy novelist, this happens. That somehow you think you've actually captured the entire world because you wrote, I mean, you worked on it, and then like it seems so full of potential. But then, as you make it better, in some weird way, it gets smaller and gets lesser. And so it's a little bit sad, even though it's wonderful to be putting it into a form it means that everything that didn't fit, that wasn't just right, has to go. And so many of those things were so full of possibility, but they have to go because you're shaping it into an artifact now. You're not.
Potential that you fall in love with.
Yeah, maybe, and I feel like I do maybe see more potential in things I write now, but then they still have to be shaped into finite things.
Something just occurred to me. Do you ever sort of write a version that's you, like that's not, that you don't do that sort of?
No, the editing is for me. The editing that makes it a palatable artifact, that makes it an artifact to be received. It really is for me. If I were on a desert island by myself, I probably would just write poetry. I wouldn't write a novel for sure. Because a novel feels like something that has to be received. I mean, a novel feels like something that needs a reader in a very profound way. I wouldn't bother to create such a thing. And so even if I am sitting in my island now writing, thinking, well, maybe it won't ever get published, I will be very sad thinking about it. Then that's when I would just write something smaller or something that was more about how it sounded and how it felt in my mouth and in my head, rather than a novel, which is it's an artifact. I mean, it's a thing it's like a building. I mean, a novel is like architecture. You know, it's something you live in and that you want other people to live in.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you miss characters when you finish a story or a novel? Do you miss living with them?
I did very much. Maybe because I was writing about pretty nice people. And when I left the manuscript for a period of time and went back to doing it, I dread it because I thought, what if it's terrible? But then when I get back to it, I thought, oh, it's not that terrible. I'd be so happy to be back with that family again. And that's happened each time now I can't stand it when I'm sick, but during that, I would miss them. They'd still be in my head, and I would be so happy to reconnect with them.
Well, I have to say, that's what's interesting about this movie coming out, because the movie of Once Upon a River is coming out, and it's the centerpiece selection at Gina Davis's film festival for women. I can't take any credit. The project is Harula Rose. She's I was the inspiration, but it's her project. I mean, she made it on her shoestring. Nobody would give her any money. Nobody gave her any money. Very little money. And she really wrote a great movie. And this has been exciting because I didn't know how much I missed Margot until Margot became Flesh. And Margot is beautiful. I mean, this Margot, and she's saying words that I wrote. It's crazy. And it's really crazy that Smoke, this character in the book, Smoke, he's exactly, it's John Ashton, and he's Smoke. I mean, like, he's saying those words, and it's like, I wrote them for him. So in a weird way, like, it is fun to come back to see them. And they're not exactly the same, so they're not really my characters, but enough so that I sort of feel like, oh, there they are again. Living a life without me, that's great.
So you've seen the film?
Yeah, I saw a draft of it. They do drafts too. Holy crap, they're all drafty. They're drafty. They have to make the scenes go together right. They gotta have transitions. They cut out a whole part where she shot the guy in the chest. Just cut it right, just cut it out. It didn't play well. Just cut it out. Shoot. People are alive who were dead in my book. They're alive. I came back.
They do have a life of their own.
Yeah.
Time to give us the.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.